They knew the state of mind I was in, and they had me looking a lot worse than...
Before he passed, George Jones named 7 Grand Ole Opry artists he hated. He was country's most fragile thunderstorm, a voice that could level you in 3 notes, a temper that flipped without warning, and an unshakable loyalty to the old codes of the Grand Ole Opry. Before the legend bowed out, stories swirled about the 7 names that stuck in his craw. People who, for one reason or another, crossed the wires of pride, jealousy, and straight-up Opry politics. Some clashes made headlines. Others lived as whispered hallway folklore, traded in dressing rooms and midnight buses where truth and exaggeration danced a two-step. Put them together and you get a map of everything he guarded and everything that kept him up at night. It isn't a tidy list, it's a jagged line of revelations that feels messy, human, and very, very country. The kind of tale you can hear just by touching the old wood at center stage. Porter Wagoner comes first because the receipt lives in George's own words. Wagoner wasn't just rhinestones and punchlines. He was Nashville muscle, a host who ran segments like a foreman and knew exactly where every downbeat belonged. One jealous night, George decided Porter had gotten too close to Tammy Wynette and barreled into the Ryman restroom ready to prove a point. Fueled by liquor and diet pills, he did something so outrageous it still ricochets through backstage lore. He grabbed first, asked questions later, and turned a private suspicion into a story nobody could unhear. It was reckless, explosive, and exactly the kind of stunt that made older pickers shake their heads while younger ones traded the tale like contraband. George didn't brag about it later. He called it a stain, a flash of wild pride that put a ring in his nose and yanked. Even at its ugliest, the episode shows what he was trying to be, a guardian of that circle, however clumsy, convinced the Opry's respect was worth starting a fight over even if he was the one who ended up bruised. He didn't pretend he was blameless. He said flat out that jealousy makes a fool out of any man and that little helpers turn a temper into a fuse. When the Wagoner mess became lore, he didn't spin it as bravado. He called it one of his worst moments and took the ribbing that came with the retelling. With Tammy, he admitted the whiplash of loving someone whose light matched his own, how 2 booming careers can crowd a kitchen until even a quiet supper becomes a referendum on pride. He joked that a good chorus can forgive a lot, but he knew better than anyone that a good chorus can't fix everything. He could laugh about it later, but he kept the receipts in his memory. A private ledger of dumb decisions he swore to outsing. A reminder that the same fire that powers a voice can also scorch the hand that holds the match. Tammy Wynette belongs here not as a villain, but as a storm system that never stopped circling his horizon. They lived on the razor where devotion turns to damage. One week they were country royalty. The next, they were passing notes through lawyers and singing about broken kitchens into the same microphone. He loved her voice like a hand on his heart and feared the way fame turned private arguments into tabloid fireworks. Rumors flared, who she'd been seen with, where she'd gone, which friendly face at an after-show felt a little too warm, and every whisper carried the echo of what he didn't want to lose. They divorced, reunited on records, fought, forgave, and made a canon of duets that sounded like 2 people trying to hold hope still long enough to breathe into it. If you want tidy heroes, go elsewhere. This was love with teeth, 2 meteors scraping the same sky and setting it alight, leaving sparks over the Opry that still haven't gone dark. Buck Owens strutted in with California sun on his boots and a sound so sharp it sliced the air. Bakersfield wasn't Nashville, and that was the point. The guitars were brighter, the backbeat hit harder, and the swagger said the headliner wore the crown. When Buck had the marquee and George had the opening slot, the no's piled up. No, he couldn't close. No, the order wouldn't budge. No, not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not on this tour. George did what only George would dare. He learned Buck's entire set and bulldozed through it as the opener, song after song, a prank so brazen the crowd roared while the headliner seethed. It was comedy with an edge, a wink with a pointed spear. The tour limped after that, but the legend sprinted, and every time some young artist complains about bill placement, An old hand still says, "Kid, there's the George way." It wasn't polite. It was effective. It told the room loud and clear that no poster would pin him to the mat when he could rewrite the script with nothing but nerve and memory. Dolly Parton is nobody's enemy. She's a force wrapped in wit and sequins, a writer who can turn a memory into a lighthouse, and an Opry pillar whose smile lowers blood pressure by 10 points. But the pipeline around her, the committees, the playlists, the radio gatekeepers, rubbed George raw when a duet he believed in never got a fair shot. He cut rockin' years with Dolly in a way that felt like two chapters from the same book finally sharing a page. Then the suits blinked, radio ducked, and another version went out to the world. George didn't blame Dolly. He blamed the system. He saw a genre where veterans begged to be heard, where a great cut could sit on a shelf while a trend got fast-tracked. He took it personally because tradition was the only currency he trusted. Years later, the unheard version surfaced and fans finally caught the blend he'd wanted them to hear. He didn't shout, "Told you so." He just went back to work, but the sting shaped his view of gatekeepers for the rest of his days. Merle Haggard understood George like a brother born on the same bar stool. Raised on honky-tonks, married to the road, sworn to the truth no matter how ugly it sounded, they traded praises and barbs like weather systems, sunny one week, stormy the next. When George wandered or walked in brittle from a run with the bottle, Merle called out the ghost and demanded the man return. When Merle bristled over some slight, real or imagined, George could go ice cold and wait him out. They fell out. They made up. They sang like they'd known each other in another life. It was brotherhood with splinters, proof that two stubborn hearts can crash and still find harmony once the first chord rings. If you want to measure how real it was, listen to the way their voices fold around each other. There's no faking that kind of trust, even when the phone calls stopped for a season and the jokes got sharp enough to draw blood. A songwriter brought "I Always Get Lucky With You" into a room when the two weren't speaking. Didn't matter. The song insisted on both men, and the truce snapped into being as naturally as a capo sliding to the second fret. That's how it went with them. Pride would flare, wires would cross, and then a lyric would arrive that demanded peace, at least long enough to get the record right. The music won every time, and even their arguments felt like proof of how seriously they took the craft. They were iron sharpening iron, and if sparks flew, well, that's the price of a blade that can cut straight through a hard week and make somebody driving home at midnight feel seen. Enter Garth Brooks, the man who turned country into a stadium sport. George respected hard work. He saw that in Garth, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the neon had gotten brighter than the story itself. When the two cut Beer Run, plans rose and fell, calendars shifted, and promises were tossed between teams as if no one remembered the old-school rule to look a man in the eye and keep your word. It didn't help that, not long before, award show producers told him to snip a verse from a song that cut straight through the ribs. He said no and stayed home. A young traditionalist later marched onto that stage, pivoted his band mid-performance, and sang George's chorus in protest, a thunderclap that told the town its own soul was on the line. That's how George measured things. Not by pyros and ticket stubs, but by whether the story in the song survived the spotlight and walked out the door with the audience. To be fair, he gave Garth his due. Talent, generosity, grind. Check, check, check. What angered him were the shuffled timetables and shiny decisions that left tradition waiting by the loading dock. The Beer Run chaos felt like a symbol of the new era. Too many handlers in the middle, not enough handshakes that stick. Stack that on top of the awards show slight, and annoyance hardened into a grudge he wore like a warning label. It wasn't personal the way some old wounds were, it was philosophical. He wanted the superstar to carry the circle like a family Bible, and he felt like the book got treated as a prop when the schedule got complicated. Jerry Lee Lewis blew into the Opry like a hurricane that refused to check the weather. He ignored time limits, bent the format until it squealed, and turned a hallowed circle into his own personal riot. The crowd roared. George, self-appointed guardian of a certain kind of respect, heard the message under the noise. The rules that shaped his life were now optional. Whether the two men ever traded words about that night isn't the point. The point is how it looked through George's eyes. The Opry was a covenant. Show up, sing true, honor the room. Anything that scoffed at the agreement scratched him like sandpaper. He didn't demand bows and curtsies. He demanded the discipline that keeps a tradition from blowing away like sawdust, and the sight of that covenant tossed like confetti made him bristle down to the boot heels. Now step back and look at the pattern. Porter stands for the line between honor and obsession. Tammy stands for the price of intimacy under a spotlight. Buck stands for the trickster's rebellion against second billing. Dolly stands for the fight to respect elders inside a youth-hungry machine. Merle stands for brotherhood and blunt honesty. Garth stands for the tension between spectacle and story. Jerry Lee stands for the chaos that sneaks in when rules turn into decorations instead of guardrails. None of those names exists here as a cardboard villain. They're catalysts. Each pressed a bruise that was already there, a spot where pride and principle argued inside George until one of them lost its temper and the other had to clean up. Here's what people miss when they reduce him to a headline about chaos. The man did the work. He showed up when it counted and left tracks that still smoke. He crawled out from under bad nights and sang with a clarity that made time slow down. He could drop one joke and glue a green room back together, then step on stage and make a grown man cry without raising his voice. He was generous with rookies who needed a nudge and gruff with executives who thought spreadsheets outranked heart. The grudges didn't invent the legend, the records did. The grudges explain why he swung when someone tried to move the fence posts and call it progress. There's a late-night image I can't shake. The Opry corridors after a broadcast sit quiet as a church after Sunday service. You hear cases latching, laughter fading, and some kid picking a stray lick under a fluorescent hum. In that hush, picture George walking past portraits of the ones who built the thing he loved. If he spoke their names, sometimes it was with a growl, other times with a cracked tenderness. He wasn't counting enemies, he was counting promises. He wasn't looking for fights, he was searching for that minute in the set when a room's heartbeat synced to a song and stayed there, suspended like dust in morning light, the kind of stillness that makes you feel forgiven for something you can't quite name. You probably clicked for shock value, restroom drama, set list revenge, big hat politics, and sure, you got some of that. But stay to the last paragraph and you see why those scraps endure. They aren't just gossip, they're guardrails. They warn new singers what happens when ego outruns craft, when the room matters less than the ring of the note, when the people who built the road get treated like speed bumps. He wasn't delicate about making the point. He used plain talk and sometimes a mean prank. He could be tender as a bruise the very next minute. He contained multitudes and expected the Opry to do the same. Make room for the new without throwing the old out with the sawdust. That balance was his creed, and he paid for it with 1,000 arguments and 100 apologies. One scene always returns whenever people argue about his line in the sand. Producers told him to trim a verse from a song that held a man's whole history. He stayed home instead of surrendering the heart of the thing to a stopwatch. Out on that stage, a younger traditionalist broke ranks mid-number, pivoted the band, and sang George's chorus before walking off to a roar that rattled the chandeliers. That wasn't just a tribute, it was a warning shot you could hear across county lines. It said the quiet part out loud. If the industry forgets its elders, the music forgets itself. George heard it like a benediction and a dare, a reminder that protecting the song sometimes means disappointing a producer with a tight schedule and a tidy show rundown. So stack the names again, Wagner, Winnett, Owens, Parton, Haggard, Brooks, Lewis, and you aren't reading a blacklist, you're reading a code. Protect the stage, protect the song, protect the elders who built the staircase, protect the kid who just walked in with a pawn shop guitar, protect the drama only if it tells the truth. That's why these tales stuck. They're messy, a little wild, sometimes jaw-dropping, but they double as a syllabus for anyone who wants to step into that circle and leave more than footprints. George didn't want saints. He wanted sincerity. He didn't want fireworks unless the lyric lit the fuse. He could forgive almost anything if the record was honest and the handshake meant something on Monday morning. He left more than lore, he left instructions hidden between the notes. Start honest, because an honest first line keeps you from lying in the chorus. Don't rush the second verse. Patience is a rhythm instrument. Trust silence, it's the prettiest harmony you'll ever hire for free. If a crowd roars at the hat before they hear the hook, lower the hat and raise the melody. If radio wants shorter, write tighter, not emptier. When the lights blind you, stare at the floorboards and remember who sanded them. Talent isn't a destination. It's a promise that you'll protect the song that invited you on stage. That's the oath he lived by, even on days when the mirror argued. Each of the 7 names pressed a button labeled danger, ego, jealousy, gatekeeping, spectacle, impatience, neglect, and chaos. He admitted he carried a few of those buttons in his own jacket. That was the maddening part and the redeeming part. He broke the code and defended it in the same breath, like a preacher quoting the verse he'd just ignored. Fans noticed and forgave because the sincerity and the groove outweighed the mess in the headlines. Real country feeds the listener, not the singer, he said. When he got that wrong, the work suffered and so did his friends. When he got it right, the whole room breathed easier, the band locked in, and the janitor hummed the tag on the way out. Imagine him now stepping into that circle with all the others. Porter wearing a showman's grin, Tammy with a secret tucked in her vowels, Buck checking the sound with a bright clipped strum, Dolly spinning a memory into fine gold thread, Merle leaning on a joke until the weight turned into a verse, Garth measuring a stage the size of a county fair and choosing story over sparks, Jerry Lee smiling like a man who still thinks rules are suggestions. The scene feels crowded and calm at once, like Sunday after the dishes are done, and there in the middle stands George, half storm, half shelter, ready to sing first and fight later if he must, but always for the song. He admitted the restroom episode embarrassed him more than any critic could. He laughed about the setlist caper like a prankster grateful he didn't double down. He called the business out when a veteran's voice went missing on purpose. He sent flowers after arguments, called younger pickers hoss and meant it, tipped drivers like they carried his masters in the trunk. The hurricane had a soft pocket, and you could feel it if you stood close enough to hear him pray. He wasn't nostalgic for nostalgia's sake. He bought new amps, tried new rooms, and worked with producers who liked glossy edges. He tracked to a click when the tune wanted one, and threw the click away when the tune needed air. When someone asked what could never change, he answered without blinking, the oath to the room. Keep time, tell the truth, quit early if you're lying, start over if you're scared. If the note won't come, don't cheat it. Wait until it wants you. That, he said, isn't stubbornness. It's faith in the craft that fed his family and his town. So when you hear those 7 names, hear 7 warning bells, not 7 curses. The stories are colorful because the stakes were real and the room was sacred. An institution doesn't survive on politeness and press releases. It survives because someone is unyielding about what matters and flexible about everything else. He mixed those up more than once, but age helped him sort the piles. In the final stretch, he seemed lighter, not because he cared less, but because he trusted the circle he fought for. The kids would carry it, the elders would bless it, and the songs would hold the middle together. Maybe your favorite part is the mess, or maybe it's the mercy. Either way, the lesson holds. Sing like a witness, fight like a steward, laugh when you can, apologize when you must. Don't let a spotlight talk you into shrinking the truth. If you bring fire, keep it inside the lyric. If you bring rain, let it fall exactly where the story needs it. Leave the fireworks outside and bring the furnace within. He didn't do that perfectly, but he did it often enough to show us how, and no headline can steal that. The gossip will keep traveling because it's catchy. The grace will keep traveling because it's useful. Truly. The first turns heads, the second turns lives. George wrestled both and knew which one helped a tired town on a Tuesday night. That's the country he defended. Songs that set a table for ordinary people and make them feel less alone. That's why the circle shakes when someone forgets the rules and why elders raise eyebrows when a producer trims truth into a slogan. That's why the 7 names aren't trophies on a grudge shelf but labels on the locks he guarded. Listen closely and you can hear the benediction he left behind. Protect the stage because sacred ground needs caretakers. Protect the song because feelings can lie and melodies seldom do. Protect the elders because memory is scaffolding. Protect the kid because courage needs a first microphone. Protect your own heart because bitterness steals range and pitch. Then walk out there, nod to the portraits, and sing like the floorboards are voting on whether you belong. If the room gets quiet, you're doing it right. If the room gets loud for the right reason, don't flinch. Bow when you finish, thank the band by name, and leave the place better than you found it. And if you ever step into that room and feel the floor hum, remember who taught it to sing. A generous hurricane named George, echoing through every note for as long as